5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to Checkered Flag. My name is Ben Edwards. Joining me is Mark Priestley, a former mechanic for McLaren in Formula One, and BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson also alongside. We've just been commentating on qualifying for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and Charles Leclerc has taken 4 pole positions over 4 years at this circuit. He's done a fantastic job. It was quite a margin he took pole position, 0.3 of a second, which is pretty rare here at Baku, but he has yet to actually win this race. That could be an opportunity for him. Oscar Piastri joined him on the front row, a superb effort in the McLaren and getting another front row start. He's never had a pole position, but it was impressive. Carlos Sainz qualified 3rd, so Ferrari are up there, but Red Bull had a more difficult time. Sergio Perez was the fastest of the 2 Red Bulls. First time this year that he's beaten Max Verstappen in qualifying. Sergio Perez qualified 4th, George Russell was 5th, and Max Verstappen, the championship leader, all the way down in 6th place. But Mark, one of the biggest stories was, where is the other McLaren? Because I haven't mentioned Lando Norris. What happened to him?
Yeah, this is the guy who's chasing down that 62-point lead in the championship behind Max Verstappen. Lando Norris knocked out in Q1, which is a real shock to everybody. Really disappointing for anyone who's been sitting there watching Formula One this year, hoping this championship is really going to come alive, because he was knocked out through no fault of his own. Really disappointing. He was on a strong lap, a lap that have easily got him through into Q2 in the next part of qualifying, and then a yellow flag came out because of a stricken Alpine car. I think it was Esteban Ocon. It was only out, the yellow flag was only out for a brief moment, a second or so, but it happened to coincide with Lando Norris coming through that same sector of the circuit, and the rules stipulate when you do that you have to back off and be ready to stop. There's an incident ahead of you. It's a really difficult one because the yellow flag came out momentarily. And normally what we've seen over many years in the past is drivers in that type of situation, assuming there's no major pile-up in front of you, and I think Lando could see what was happening. He could see the stricken Alpine. He knew there wasn't a major incident. It was only a single yellow flag, by the way, not a double wave. What we normally see is a driver just lifting off the throttle pedal, just so that you get almost a marker in the data, so when the FIA want to come back and look at it later on, they can show that you did actively lift off the throttle, therefore you slowed down and compromised your lap. But what Lando did was actually just abort the lap, and it's a really strange thing, so we need to look into it a little bit more, but it looks to me, in the short time we've had to sort of analyse this, he kind of went too far. And even, you know, this is a McLaren that's a very fast car. We can see that from the lap time that Oscar was able to do in it. On a circuit they were looking pretty strong at. In Q3, there's a lot of cars around him way slower. For me, a little lift on the throttle should still easily see him make his way through. He got a little bit out of shape in the final corner as well, so maybe the lap was compromised, but it just seemed a messy way of dealing with an almost so simple incident of that brief yellow flag.
Andrew, what a time for this to happen, because we're going into the final third of the season. The second third has really worked for McLaren. They've been the stronger team. And although the gap in points between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen is still at 62 points, he has been closing that gap up a little bit. And everyone's been looking at, are we going to have a championship battle? But this is a big hit for Lando Norris and for McLaren.
It's massive. He has to close basically at an average of 8 points a race, which he's managed over the last 2 races in the Netherlands and Italy. But the pressure was on because he needed to keep doing that race after race after race. And really, realistically, given that, you know, you're not going to beat someone like Max Verstappen every race, you wouldn't have thought, he was also probably hoping for some bad luck for Verstappen. As it's happened, the first bit of bad luck in this final third of the season has come to him. There are questions as to whether he and McLaren between them handled the situation as well as they could have done. Did he really have to back off as much as he did? He also, by the way, after backing off for the flag, made a mistake coming out at the final corner and ran over the curb. So we don't know whether he was still trying to do his lap at that point. It looked like he probably was, otherwise why would he have been over the curb so much? But that's what's happened. He is starting 17th. Verstappen's only 6th. It was actually a perfect opportunity for Norris. Piastri's qualified 2nd between the 2 Ferraris. If he can do that, Norris could have done the same. I don't think he would have beaten Leclerc. Really, we should be looking at a race that started with Norris starting 2nd and Verstappen starting 7th, and a really good opportunity to make a big load of points back on the Red Bull driver. Unless there's some kind of crazy Baku race, which Verstappen and Red Bull get caught out by, that's 2 things that need to happen, because Verstappen and Red Bull don't generally get caught out by things very often, even if there is some kind of crash madness, which is is likely in Baku. He's looking at losing points. That average is going to go up. It might be 10 points a race by the end of tomorrow on the race on Sunday. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But it's a massive blow to not just Norris's title hopes, but everybody's hopes of a competitive end to the season.
I think obviously it's a massive blow, I get it, but I think there is an element to this where you have to, if you look at the span of races we've got left, you've got to accept that at least one of those is going to be bad luck from one or the other. This might be that it's Lando's turn to take the bad luck today, but if you look at where Verstappen is, down in P7 on a very difficult circuit, particularly the first part of the lap, on lap 1 you don't want to be in the middle of that melee down in P7 going into the really tight part of that old circuit. There is every chance Max could get caught up in something. But on the plus side for Red Bull, they've got 2 cars in that fight. In a long race, assuming they get through lap 1, they've got the option, and I'm sure they'll take it, to, if they need to, switch Perez and Verstappen. That'll gain some points. McLaren just don't have a lot of talk of McLaren doing exactly that. They haven't got the opportunity now with where Norris starts.
So just to clarify on the Norris yellow flag incident, I've been in sort of live conversation with McLaren about it while we're doing this via a popular messaging app. They say he was shown yellow flags, so just to bury that one, because there were questions as to whether it was just a white flag, which means just as a slowing car on the circuit. So he definitely got yellow flags, which meant that he did have to lift off. Then of course it's a question of how much you lift off, and of course the risk is if you don't lift off enough you're going to get disqualified. So that's a difficult balance for a racing driver to tread. What McLaren is saying is what they're not sure of is why the yellow flags were shown at that point. And they're going to be picking that up with the FIA, because what it was about was Alpine's Esteban Ocon, who was driving slowly around the circuit. You know, what was he doing driving slowly around the circuit? First of all, ruining everybody's final laps. Was it necessary, if it's a slow car, to have yellow flags? Yellow flags are really for a stopped car, not a slow car. So lots of questions about that too for the FIA as well as McLaren. And of course it's not the first time the way the FIA have run their race operations has been called into question in the last few years.
It's quite interesting that team engineer also made an apology to Lando as he came in slowly. So
they say that was just a general remark about the bad luck that he'd had, and it wasn't a specific reference to anything that the team had done wrong.
Well, it's a tough one for Lando Norris. Let's hear from him now.
Lando, so sorry to see you out in Q1. Was that just the typical Baku qualifying where yellow flags can catch you out at the wrong time?
Yeah, pretty just that really. There was, the lap was easily good enough, just a yellow flag, so I had to back off.
We've seen people can come with a big long straight, they can come and make up positions. Is that just the best you can hope for tomorrow, try and crack into the top 10?
Yeah, but I don't even think it's as easy as that, honestly. Following is pretty much impossible around here, and overtaking's, I think, a lot worse than what everyone thinks. So I hope I'm wrong, of course. I hope there's plenty of chances, but I'm not expecting so, and there's a lot of cars behind who are very low downforce, which will be pretty much impossible to overtake. So I'm honestly not expecting a lot from 17th, but we'll put in a good plan tonight, and we'll do our best, of course. But I don't know what's going to happen, so we're just going to wait and see.
So not a great day for Lando Norris, but a particularly good day for Charles Leclerc, who seems to love this Baku circuit, and the fact that he's taken his 4th pole position consecutively here for Ferrari, yet he has never taken a victory. It's actually his 3rd pole of this year. 1 pole went to a victory in Monaco. Of course, pole in Monaco always matters. His other pole position in Belgium, that ended up with a 3rd place. Can he win this race for the first time in his career, having been so fast here for so many years?
I think he can, because if you go back over the last couple of years, the reason he's got so many poles is the Ferrari was actually a stronger car in qualifying trim than it ever was in race trim, and it was actually the race that they've often struggled in sort of managing tyre life over the longer distance of a Grand Prix. Well, this year's Ferrari is actually almost the opposite. So the fact they've managed to stick it on pole around a circuit that he does love, he's in good form, and he managed to get hooked up really nicely. They're still in really good shape for tomorrow, because the car, the race pace of the car from Friday practice and the traditional over the course of this season, typical race pace, also looks really good. So I'd say this is his best shot. And don't forget, he's got his teammate in P3 right now. It's Leclerc who's got any hope of a potential championship. He's the guy staying. Sainz is leaving the team at the end of the year. If it comes down to it, in terms of using one driver to help the other, it will be Sainz that gets used to help either create a gap for Charles to pit into, or to be as a bit of a buffer from anyone behind. Of course, Carlos Sainz's job is to get ahead of Oscar Piastri and be a bit of a protection to Leclerc, but I think he's got the best shot he's had for a few years at this.
Andrew, I think another interesting point, the fact that both Ferraris are up near the front, and we've been talking about the fact that McLaren are very close to Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship, but Ferrari are not that much further back, and they've got both cars up there this time, both ahead of Red Bull. So in terms of Constructors' Championship, we could end up with a three-way battle between Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari.
Well, McLaren have been talking about that already before the weekend. In fact, the interview that I did with Andrea Stella that revealed that they were going to get Piastri to help Norris if possible this weekend, he was making the point that Ferrari were only 31 points behind them in the Constructors' Championship, so it was a three-way fight there, and this just underlines that. Charles Leclerc's been putting in some really strong under the radar race performances in that Ferrari. He had a slightly sticky patch after that win in Monaco when things went a bit wrong with the team, but he's done some really super race drives. That drive in Spa to third place was brilliant. He started sixth. He didn't think he had any chance of a podium there. Then he won in Monza, obviously. Really outstanding performance on a one-stop strategy, beating the McLarens there. I think people underestimate Leclerc because he, as a race driver, as opposed to a racing driver, because he has such a strong record of poles, which at a relatively low percentage conversion to victories, they think that means that there's something wrong with his race drives, but it isn't. When you actually go through what happened to him in each of those particular situations, yes, there were a couple of races where he had a crash, like France 2022, but usually where it's gone wrong for Leclerc when he hasn't converted a pole is because the Ferrari either hasn't been good enough in the race in terms of it uses his tyres too much, or the engine's broken down, or they've messed up the strategy or something. It's not really been his fault. There's been like one or two out of 20 odd or something poles that he's not converted into a win. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, so forgive me, everybody, don't write in. So I think there's no reason to think that he can't convert that pole into a win, because, as he's been saying all weekend actually, the Ferrari is really good on race pace this year. They've made a real effort to make it better on tyre wear. So as long as he keeps that lead at the first few laps, I think he can control the race from the front. There's no reason to think that he shouldn't be able to win it.
No, but as you say, keeping the lead in those first few laps is not always the easiest thing. Let's hear from Charles Leclerc.
Well, Charles, congratulations, you are even maestro around here. How was that lap? Was it one of the best you've ever done?
The best I've ever done around here, I think, was 2021, where the car was nowhere. I mean, was not nowhere, but was a very, very difficult year for us. So I think we were fighting between 7th and 12th, and to be on pole here was a huge surprise. But it was a really good lap as well this year. I just trying and find the confidence and taking a bit more risks lap after lap. I knew that the performance was there, that I just had to put everything together, which I kind of did in Q3. So. I'm really happy.
I don't need to remind you that you failed to convert the last three pole positions here, but the race pace looked strong on Friday as far as we could see from our data. Is that the feeling with you as well?
Yeah, I mean, the feeling was good. Just obviously looking at the past years, I think on the 3 years I've done pole position, I think one, we had the car to be on pole position. The other two, the 21 and 23, were particularly good lap, and I think we were a bit out of place. So I did not expect to win those years. 2022, the engine blew up when we were leading, unfortunate. And tomorrow, I hope that the pace that we have seen all over the weekend will still be there tomorrow, which is a completely different thing, because with high fuel, tyre degradation will be a big thing, so we need to be on top of this. And if we are, then hopefully we can bring the victory home.
Congratulations. Thank you.
So Charles Leclerc starting from pole position. He's got his own teammate behind him who starts third, and he feels that that's a good side of the track to start from. But they're going to both be up against Oscar Piastri. And Mark, we do know, especially watching Monza last time, how effective Oscar Piastri can be on the opening lap of a Grand Prix. He's a good starter and he's a good attacker as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. He's a very fast racing driver, and he's gaining experience all of the time. He's shaping up to be a real talent and someone who's got a bright future in this sport. He is McLaren's only real hope, isn't he, in this particular Grand Prix, given what's happened to Lando Norris. And I think he'll relish that. There's been a lot of talk in this last week or so, and even beyond, about the championship fight, and it's all focused around Lando Norris. He's almost had to take a bit of a back seat to some extent, slip out of the limelight, and even to the point where the sort of media coverage, and even now his own team, kind of accepting that if it comes to it, they will ask him to step aside and move out the way to allow Lando to get a victory to help his own championship challenge. So that's a little bit destabilising. It's not the sort of preparation you want coming into a weekend. That's all gone now. He is McLaren's main man tomorrow. When they're thinking up strategies over the course of tonight, it'll be focused on him. When they're looking at who makes the first pit stop, who takes the sort of optimum strategy, it's going to be focused around him, and it'll be all out trying to get him to the front. So there is no concern of him having to play second fiddle tomorrow. It's about getting him past the Ferraris, and as you said, his first lap performances over the recent times have been good enough to potentially do that.
Absolutely. He failed to score points here last year. He did qualify 10th, finished in 11th place, but in Formula 2, in his coming up through the ranks, as it were, he did have a good second place finish here in 2021. So the Baku circuit is one that he is definitely getting into very well. It was a very effective qualifying session from him. Let's hear what he had to say.
Congratulations, P2. Was that one of those laps that leaves you sort of shaking a little bit when you cross the line?
A little bit, yeah. I was hoping that my car was going to stay together. Yeah, it wasn't the cleanest of laps, but I certainly got the most out of it, I think. I maybe lost a little bit of time in a couple of places with that, but not enough to get Charles today. So overall, I'm happy with the job I did, and puts us in a good spot for tomorrow.
Obviously, it's focused on the win now. Presumably, just try and get him into turn one, and then manage the race from there. Presumably, that's your race plan.
Yeah, definitely try and get into the lead. Clean air is going to be beneficial everywhere. So that would make life easier. I'm on the dirty side of the grid, so that's not going to help. But that's definitely the plan.
Good luck. Thank you.
So Oscar Piastri starting from second place, and he was pushing hard on that flying lap, wasn't he? He just made a little bit of contact with the wall.
Yeah, that's what he was referencing there. It was a messy lap, and he did hit the wall with the right rear corner. It luckily didn't cause enough damage to hamper him too much, but I think there was more time in the McLaren, and although he didn't deliver it today, there is a bit of confidence there in that the Ferrari's not 3/10 ahead of it at outright pace. It's just that Leclerc did a better job today. So that McLaren is quick. And if you think about the opening lap tomorrow, he's starting second. If he can stay second for most of the lap, getting on to that last sector where it's really flat out all the way down, the massive power of the sort of drag effect, he could find himself being towed all the way down that straight and catapulted into the lead. So it's almost a kind of weird scenario where you almost don't want to be in the lead of the race at the end of lap one, coming into that final sector. You want to be in second so that you can then make the break for it and try and get away from the DRS zone.
It's an interesting point. This race has been won twice in the past from pole position, only once from second position. But I tell you what, it has been won a couple of times from is third place. Now, third on the grid is Carlos Sainz, of course, in the other Ferrari. And as ever, he's been out-qualified by a teammate here in Baku, which he always has. But he was actually quite pleased, I think, with the feeling of the car. He was going off down the escape roads quite a lot during our free practice sessions, but in that final part of qualifying he did a good job to go third fastest.
He seemed really happy with that, didn't he? Because even by his own admission, this has not been his strongest circuit over the years. He's never quite sure why it is, but he feels he doesn't perform at his best. So to do that today, although he is behind his teammate, I think he felt like that was a sort of an excelling of his own performance compared to where he thought he might be. But from a team perspective, as I said earlier on, it gives the team a very strong opportunity tomorrow to use both cars when it comes to strategy. Highly likely to be a one-stop race tomorrow, so you can start to use your second driver to help create a gap to drop your first driver into. You can use them as a buffer, so more opportunities if you've got two cars in there, unlike McLaren who only have one.
Andrew, it's quite an interesting situation in that Carlos Sainz has been a very major part of the Ferrari team for a few years, but he's leaving at the end of the year. Do you feel that he can still work with Leclerc effectively tomorrow to make it work for Ferrari, even though by the end of this season he's going off to the Williams team for a complete restart in Formula One for him?
I do think that he'll work with Leclerc. Yes, I do. He's a feisty character, Carlos Sainz. He's a determined character, but ultimately he's also a team player and he understands this situation. And so I think if Ferrari call on him to help Leclerc, they will. And let's not forget that there have been plenty of times when Leclerc's helped him, not least, for example, in Singapore last year. Basically, Leclerc completely sacrificed his race in Singapore last year on the team's orders. It was a plan going into the Grand Prix for Leclerc to back the rest of the field up to ensure that Sainz kept the lead after the first stint at the pit stops. So it's not like there isn't sort of a previous example that Ferrari can call on, even if he is leaving the team. Just on the relative pace between those two drivers, I don't think it's so much that Sainz isn't particularly good at Baku. I think it's just that Leclerc is absolutely outstanding at Baku. I don't understand why he's so quick around there. He's just quick generally, but he's especially quick around Baku and also Monaco for that matter. And I think that's just what the Sainz is seeing. It's just his teammate is just outstanding around this circuit.
It's interesting actually, isn't it, Mark? Because early this year, Carlos Sainz was very strong. I don't know whether the car was in a slightly different state then, but Charles seemed to be struggling just a little bit at the beginning part of the year. But right now, Charles is looking very comfortable. The effect that he had at Monza, the performance in Monaco earlier this year as well, he really is back into his normal state, especially in qualifying.
Yeah, seeming really confident. You're absolutely right. And you know, what we're seeing is a bit of a shift because the cars are being developed at such a rapid rate right now. It is changing the characteristics. We're seeing it at Red Bull, we've seen it at McLaren, we're seeing it at Ferrari perhaps, where the characteristics of the car with the latest developments might suit one driver more than the other, or one driver is able to get a hang of that a little bit easier than the other, and that can completely shift the order.
Okay, well, let's hear from Carlos Sainz starting from third.
What colour's P3 on a track that I think I'm right in saying is maybe not your favourite on the calendar? How do you reflect on that?
Yeah, spot on. It's a track that I've always struggled in the past, so to be actually starting P3 is not a bad position for tomorrow. Just for some reason doesn't come very natural to me, the driving around here, while there are other tracks that I'm quick straight away in FP1. Here is the opposite, but luckily on the other side of the garage I probably have the fastest man around Baku, so we are P1 and P3 going into tomorrow, and I think we have a strong chance of scoring some good points.
Well, I was going to ask, now is the Constructors' Championship coming into sharper focus for Ferrari? McLaren with only Oscar up there, Red Bull seemingly struggling, Mercedes behind you. Are you starting to think more about the Constructors?
Depends on tomorrow. If tomorrow we manage to cut a bit more and finish the job, we will think more about it.
So Carlos Sainz starting from third. On that second row of the grid alongside him, it'll be Sergio Perez, who for the first time this year has actually out-qualified his teammate Max Verstappen, but we're not too surprised it's happened here because Perez always loves racing at Baku.
He does. He seems to be very comfortable around this circuit. What's, I guess, a tiny bit surprising is that he's been so far off the boil for the large part of this season. It's great that we're seeing him kind of come back on form, but it's happened at a time when his teammate seems to be disappearing a little bit in terms of form. Max Verstappen wasn't happy or comfortable at all over the course of this weekend really so far. Although he put a couple of decent laps in, he was always complaining about the car, whereas Perez seems actually to be quite content, quite comfortable with it. So a good strong showing from him, and I think with both cars, their biggest plus out of today is that their main title rival in terms of Lando Norris is nowhere to be seen.
Absolutely right. George Russell has lined up fifth on the grid. He's out-qualified Lewis Hamilton again, and that's actually, he's won the head-to-head versus Hamilton no matter what happens for the rest of the year, because that is now 13-4 ahead of Lewis. So he has out-qualified him this year in terms of numbers, but of course Hamilton has scored more points. So Max Verstappen is starting in sixth place, the championship leader. As you say, the fact that his bigger rival Lando Norris is down towards the back is not such bad news for Max Verstappen, but still starting sixth. He is a racer. He will still go for as far forward as he can. Lewis Hamilton starting in seventh place, and Fernando Alonso doing another decent job in the Aston Martin. He qualified in eighth, but right behind Fernando Alonso we have a bit of surprise, because both of the Williams were next up, and that was a very, very impressive performance. Alex Albon had a rather odd time, but Franco Colapinto, who was actually faster than Albon, he has had only his second ever Grand Prix, and he's got into the top 10. That is remarkable. First time an Argentinian's done that since the early 1980s. But what about Alex Albon? What was that incident of him trying to come out of the pit lane?
Well, I'll explain what it was. Unfortunately, it comes off the back of, exactly as you say, a really strong day, a really strong performance for Williams as a team, getting both cars into the top 10. Brilliant stuff. But unfortunately, in Q3, they sent Alex Albon's car out with the roll hoop fan. So a giant piece of equipment, a fan, which sits there while the car's in the garage, plugged into the roll hoop inlet, so that big opening above the driver's head, and it just sits there blowing air through the system, pumping it into the radiators and into the engine to keep things temperatures under control. They paint it fluorescent yellow, and it's enormous. Now their car's not fluorescent yellow, it's blue, so it's a pretty obvious thing to spot. Now I hate criticising human error, because it happens to all of us, but they paint it bright yellow so that it's so obvious you can't ever miss the fact that it's still in there. And somehow that's what they did. So they sent the car out of the garage with the giant fan still in the top of the roll hoop. He got as far as the end of the pit lane before people realised, and he pulled over to stop. And it was Alex himself from inside the driver's seat who had to reach up above his head, extract the giant fan and try and chuck it out the side of the car to the marshals. So a bit of a human error. I don't think you can describe it anything other than a massive cock-up.
Well, a great shame, but his teammate Franco Colapinto did a great job. But Andrew, interesting that both of the young drivers who are only going into their second ever Grand Prix both did a good job in qualifying. Oliver Bearman, the British driver who is now racing for Haas this weekend in place of Kevin Magnussen, he didn't quite make the top 10, but he will be starting from 11th on the grid.
Yeah, and I think it says something for Ollie Bearman and his sort of expectations of himself. These a couple of places ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, his teammate, a couple of tenths ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, his teammate, and he was still berating himself for a mistake around the castle area of the track, which he thought would have stopped him getting into the top 10. He was a bit disappointed with himself, he said, more not for the mistake so much, but more for the crash that he had in final practice. But be that as it may, he's still ahead of Hülkenberg, which is a very impressive performance for his first Grand Prix in that car. Okay, he's driven it a fair bit before because he's done some first practice sessions, and he is the team's reserve driver, and he is their signed driver for next year. But impressive nonetheless. And in terms of Colapinto is another one. It's rather it underlines why they got rid of Logan Sargent, and also underlines how Logan Sargent wasn't doing the job and how probably should have been got rid of before. There's just one bit of final news that we need to worry about. Pierre Gasly, Alpine's not had a good weekend. There's been lots of failures. Technically, Esteban Ocon, we've already talked about as having a problem with his car, inflicting that problem onto Lando Norris. Gasly's car has been found to have exceeded the instantaneous mass fuel flow at one point during qualifying. The Formula One engines run to a maximum fuel flow limit to keep power under control. That will almost certainly mean disqualification.
Yeah.
For Pierre Gasly, that's remarkable, because I think that's happened to him before when he was driving for another team. So I'll have to look back into the history
happened
of
to
it.
Daniel Ricciardo when he won a race. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. It was a Renault engine, a Red Bull in Australia. Correct. In 2014. That was good memory, Mark.
Of course, it bumps Lando Norris one place further up the grid, I think.
Yeah, no, that
if he does get disqualified.
That is remarkable, but it was back in 2019 he definitely got some penalty as well. So anyway, it's a very interesting point. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Looking further down the grid, Hülkenberg ended up 14th behind Gasly, but if Gasly now has a penalty, of course Hülkenberg will be moved up to 13th. Lance Stroll was behind him. Then Daniel Ricciardo, who was out-qualified by his teammate Yuki Tsunoda once again, and Tsunoda does tend to go well. He is 12th on the grid. Lando Norris, of course, all the way down. He'll be down in 16th place with some of the infringements that have come along. Bottas behind him, Zhou Guanyu and Esteban Ocon. But that is how the grid is lining up. But we are in for a fascinating race on Sunday.
Yeah, I think so. The championship's heating up now, and it might seem like an extravagant thing to say that when we've got still quite a few races to go and such a large points gap at the front, but don't take what's happened to Lando Norris as the end of this championship fight. I wouldn't say that's happened at all. I think the championship fight is still on. Singapore is coming up very quickly. We know Red Bull struggle there and McLaren should excel. This is a little blip. Don't turn off your sets, folks. Absolutely not. And Andrew, just to quickly bring in a thought on strategy for the race itself, because qualifying in Baku is always a very different story to the race.
It's normally a one-stop. and which makes Norris's life difficult to come through the field. Also, Norris was saying that although there's this really long straight, and you would expect as a result overtaking to be easy, actually last year it wasn't. Now the DRS zone has been extended this year, but even so, Norris has already been bemoaning the fact that overtaking is still difficult. He says, as he described it, following is impossible. So he says he might be wrong, of course, when it comes to the race, but if you remember, it's happened before. People have got stuck. Verstappen couldn't overtake Perez last year. Lewis Hamilton ended up in a situation in one of the Baku races a couple of years ago, and but what we do know about Baku is that there's walls, it's high speed, there can be lots of incidents. So it's safety cars, those sorts of things that really throw the sort of the strategists a curveball. And in that sort of race, then anything is potentially possible for Norris. Let's not forget that Lance Stroll even finished on the podium here a couple of years ago. So he can come through. But if it's a normal, boring race and a one-stop strategy, then it's going to be tough for Norris.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this race works out. Will Ferrari actually manage to take their first victory? Where will Lando Norris get to from so far down the grid? Will Max Verstappen continue to build up the points lead that he has, even though he's not actually qualifying so well? You're going to be able to join us on Radio 5 Live for the full live coverage from midday on Sunday. I do hope you can join us then. From all of us on Chequered Flag, goodbye.